unique to Kansas. So, all right. Anyone on social media? Deidre, right? Deidre, yeah, you're okay. Well, you're welcome to do that since you're the one that's really nodding your head on this. I do encourage social media and would love for you to use this KS Econ. Here, I'll move over here. KS Econ, if you want to take a picture of something, the slides are also on our website, by the way. So you can do screenshots of slides. That way you can do it. I would just, since it probably won't go very well this crowd, but as I was thinking, my favorite hashtag is doom scrolling. How many people did that? You probably did it today. This is when you look at your phone and you look for the next doomsday news, right? That was my favorite hashtag of this year. I asked my 2 teenagers what their favorite hashtags were. One said in quarantine, which is kind of funny for Kansas, right? And the other one says maskne, which is mask acne, because they're wearing masks all the time. So anyway, you're welcome to do that. Get on there. One thing I always do is I always use the slide from last year, and I wasn't here last year to have one, but I'm still doing this to show you what I said last year at this time. Last year, at this exact time, I thought Kansas economy was going to grow by 0.6%. And you've got to wonder, why in the world was I thought Kansas was going to grow? Matter of fact, my theme last year was a health checkup. I had this whole theme about blood pressure and all these vital signs. And the reason why I did that is I did a survey of businesses. I've been doing it for 11 years. And the businesses said, the majority of them said we were going to have a recession in 2020. I actually was thinking, what is going to be the next recession? I was thinking, what is it? And I asked everywhere I went last year, do you know what the recession is going to be? Because it's likely something we don't know. And when I really came down to it, the fundamentals were actually really strong for Kansas. And I said, no, we were weak for a few years. We're actually now catching our own. We're actually healing the labor market. Things are looking really good in Kansas right now, and we should grow. But, and that was the but that we come into now for the coronavirus. So I was thinking it was going to grow. I was wrong on that one. But I have predicted a slowdown in Kansas in the 17, which people thought I was crazy. I said, no, we're just going to slow down and go into a mini recession, and we did. So we have been giving pretty good advice. This one, there's no way we could have done. So the question is, if last year's a health checkup, I was worried about a recession. The business is worried about a recession. Obviously, I didn't heed it well enough. The question is, what is my theme this year? And I can only think of one thing that I felt would be helpful to talk about. And that's a Shakespearean tragedy, because that's really what we felt like, right? And in every Shakespeare, if you remember back to high school, has 5 acts. So I'll break it up into 5 sections. The first section I'm going to use is supernatural forces. And if you think about supernatural forces, you look at Macbeth, right? It's witches. And you think Hamlet, it is ghosts. In 2020, it is, you can be a little bit more interactive. Yeah, coronavirus, COVID. Yeah, you got it. So I thought this would be helpful to get into it. I will pause. Let me pause right here before I talk about the coronavirus and kind of pause and see what we did all that doom scrolling, all that negative news. I'm going to let's see what was real and kind of put it in some context. Are there any big questions you really want answered today? I could try to include it. I can go in multiple directions on this. No, any concerns that you have about the national, state, regional economy? I have been on a road tour. I don't know if you saw it on our website, but I've been to several communities and talking to all these businesses across the state. So I have other information I can relay back to you guys. So if you start asking, the more interactive we are, the more interesting this will get. I will tell you that. Although I'm trying to make it interesting with this. Yes, Jason.
Concern is if those bordering states or whatnot start to close back in, what that looks like for us in Western Kansas per se.
So a perspective that you think you're doing better, and then a concern of bordering states and how that might affect this one. And since you're in the leisure and hospitality, you want travel, you want people to moving around, that kind of thing. I got it. Very good. All right, so I'm going to pause and look at supernatural forces, or COVID for us. The first thing I thought I'd do, you heard about the hard-hit industries. And I put this in easy perspective. I said if January was 100% for all these sectors, if you move forward to April, what would it look like then? And here's your, unfortunately, leisure and hospitality dropped down to 51%. That means you lost 49% of the jobs in that 1 month compared to January now. And if you move forward, you can see that hard hit sector keep creeping up, and is now towards that 76% of employment is reemployed in that sector. You look at the other ones, it varied. There's one sector that just seems to completely miss it, and that was bankers. Right? Bankers are too busy putting out PPP loans and refinancing how mortgages to even know if they got laid off because they were so busy right then, right? All right, this one really does tell a story. We heard this news, a different lens. Who did the COVID impact the most? It did impact women more than men. It impacted people with less education more than people with higher education, and it impacted minorities more. The question is why? Well, you really go back to the previous slide. The hard industries, hardest hit, are also the ones that tend to have people in those sectors, right? And that's why it was hit really hard. The next question is, if those are all being impacted and you have this big trend, the question is how much is going to stick? The teleworking, urban de-densification, and automation forcing. And by the way, if you heard the news in like New York, people are just leaving New York. People are leaving some of the big cities. But that's also in urban communities like you think Kansas City and Wichita. People are going to the suburbs. And that's also in micropolitan towns, also moving further to the suburbs, right? So if you have this, what are the jobs that are losing? Those are the jobs that they might have not been essential, but they kept working, right? Those professional service jobs, right? I was a professional service. Back in April, they said, can you leave? And my staff said, yeah, we could leave. We could go and work from home easy. And we did, right? So if you have more of this teleworking world, then the question is, what's going to happen to the labor market? Because this one sector had a lot of upward mobility opportunities. Think about administrative assistants and security guards and that leisure and hospitality in urban areas. Those tend to give opportunities. You work while you go to school and then you can move up. And if we lose a lot of those support jobs to that, it could have a really negative part to our economy, that labor market of growing and people moving up in the labor. So I will say, if you remember back to Shakespeare, the beginning of the play, the environment is very different than the end. In that case, COVID has changed our economy so much, I think it's shifted. And I'm actually going to give you a counter argument where I think we have a different dynamic going on our labor market, even out here, than we did before. All right, this one, if I told you personal income skyrocketed in the second quarter, most people thought it was crazy. And by the way, I did not adjust anything on this slide. This is just plain data year. Look at that, 0% to all of a sudden skyrocketing on there. Now, what are the components of personal income? I only showed you a couple. The two most important ones that impacted earnings. And this looks like earnings dropped a little, but earnings dropped a lot. Earned income, wages, dropped a whole lot. It just gets masked by transfer of payments. What is transfer of payments? That's the unemployment insurance from the federal government and the state government that went in and flooded the market and helped stabilize. Now, it doesn't matter. Economists, both Republican and Democrat, will say unemployment insurance itself is the most effective and efficient way of stabilizing the economy. Now, we could disagree on the $600 that came out from the federal government, and I imagine we will disagree quite a bit, but it's very effective. Now, when you talk about effectiveness, a lot of that cash went out, right? And if you start thinking about how was the economy over the summer, was it starting to feel better as a consumer? It probably was. Even as we went into fall, it's probably still feeling a little bit better and better every single day. I just want to share that the reason why I was feeling better is we had all this cash floating out there. This is just on the unemployment insurance side. Matter of fact, those higher income people that they kept earning money, those people were unemployed, kept cash going. As long as cash was flowing, it was flowing back into those hard hit sectors. I just showed you 2 sectors ago, and those households that were over there. Well, unemployment insurance finished in July. So why haven't we felt that? The reason why is savings rate went up so high that we've been burning off our savings rate the last couple of months. And now that's why the Federal Reserve came back 2 weeks ago and said, oh no, we need this federal stimulus because we're about to hit the wall. All this cash is disappearing. That money churning is slowing down and we can see it. And unfortunately, that's the issue. And I didn't look I was driving this morning up to get up here, so I didn't see the latest news on the stimulus package, but it's looking less and less likely that will happen. Both sides say it needs to happen, but if it doesn't, get ready. It's going to really retrench us back into a recession. Those jobs, those hard-hit jobs, are going to lose their jobs real quickly again. Travel is going to start slowing down again because we won't have the cash to go through. All right. The impact of this on Kansas on the employment side now. I will say back in April, I said, you have to do an impact. What's the impact of this? Then I turned it into an employment forecast in May. I had to make some assumptions. I thought Kansas was going to decline by 10.2% in this year, and we didn't. So good news, we did not decline as much as the nation, and we didn't decline by 10.2%. I thought some parts of the state, those that were in the durable side of manufacturing, were going to decline by even more. I thought it was going to be really hard hit. I'm saying that, already telling you that I was wrong, but actually I still think there are parts of it I am right. So I'm going to tell you the parts I know that I am wrong. The first one is when I did this, I had to make a simplifying assumption. I said Kansas is going to get the same PPP loans and that federal stimulus checks, remember that? I thought we were going to get the same as everyone else because I had to make a quick assumption. I was wrong. If you want to see the slides, I can show it to you. We got a lot more PPP loans than in other places, partly because we had hard-hit sectors. We had small and medium banks that knew people, and they got the cash out fast. That actually helped save some of the jobs, a lot of the jobs. So, well, that's good that I was wrong on that part. Another one that I was wrong, that stimulus check, we ended up getting more checks because we were already filing our insurance, because we're good Kansans, right? We're going to follow the rules, and we did it. So we actually got stimulus checks faster into our economy than other states did. Well, that had cash flowing through our economy. Another one that didn't necessarily get wrong, but is a unique part of it that has changed it, is businesses in Kansas were better financially capitalized going into this, which I'll show you later. So we had more cash on hand. When I did a panel of businesses said, well, why didn't you lay people off like the nation did? By the way, we did the same thing in 2008. We didn't lay people off that we could have or should have maybe have done. And they said, no, we are already a tight labor market. I need that person there. I'm going to take my extra cash and keep that person employed. It's too hard to re-employ them in Kansas, so I'm going to hold on to them. And you probably recognize as soon as I shared that to a lot of places around the state, they said, yeah, I could have let some people go. I took the loss because I wanted to keep them and I needed to keep them on. And those are the factors. But I'm going to come back to this because I think I'm actually closer to that number, as I'll show you in another slide. The next question is how and when are we going to come out of this? First thing you got to remember, it's not like a normal economic bubble. If there was a bubble like the housing crisis, it would burst, the financial markets would correct itself, and we could go on. We can't go on. COVID has this dark shadow over our economy. Until there is a vaccine and dissemination, we do not have a clear going on of this overall global or national market. So this comes from the good judgment. I looked up last night, changed it slightly on their forecast. It's actually not as optimistic as this. It actually got a little bit more pessimistic. They pay these people to forecast when we'll have this, but they're not experts. They get paid for accuracy. They do this all the time, and it actually has got some great track records of other forecasts they're doing. So this one, it said 53% think we will have a vaccine by the end of the school year and another 38% by the beginning of the next school year. Well, when I looked last night, it went to like closer to 48 and 48%. We're thinking though, so still, we've got a long ways. It's going to be all the way through the spring, potentially through the summer, before we have a solution to COVID. So that's going to really weigh down on our national economy, state economies. So the first act was supernatural forces. One thing about Shakespeare is he never lets the natural forces to be the whole theme of the play, right? It's only used to identify the character flaw of our hero. And in this, we're going to say our character is the labor market. And we're going to see the issues of the labor market. So let's examine that a little bit. By the way, a character flaw, if you think of Macbeth, he was overly ambitious, right? All right, unemployment rates, everyone usually likes to look at that. At the national level, it got peaked at 14.7%, and then it came down to 8.4%, right? You can see the labor market's healing. Another way, we lost around 22 million jobs, and about 11 million jobs came back, right? So we're improving, but there's still a lot of people unemployed. And if you look around the state, it varies a little bit. A better way to look at this, unemployment insurance claims. And what I did to this is I said unemployment insurance claims per 1,000 workers in that sector. And I want to show you this because there's three very distinct labor markets. You have all the way back here in January, and you can look up construction. Per 1,000 construction workers in Kansas, 5.6 had initial unemployment claims that week. That's during off season, right? That is a sign of a very, very tight labor market. Matter of fact, and it's not here, but well, I could look at this, by the way, here. I could actually do it. But if I looked at here, it was looking like this for quite a while, right? You were a very tight labor market. Everyone who was employed was already employed. It was really low per 1,000. There wasn't extra people out there. They get to the peak for Kansas, and you see manufacturing went up to 84. So out of 1,000 manufacturing workers in Kansas, 84 went and applied for unemployment insurance claims. You come down here in the arts and or combinations of food, it went up almost to 93 people per 1,000 people were there, right? That's a very different labor market. This was right when we were shutting down the markets across the state and the global economy. Very different. You move forward to, I'll just say today for simple terms, you see something very different, right? We've opened up the markets. It's a different labor market than it was before, right? Where we're seeing people now getting initial unemployment claims are in different sectors. Why? As we opened the market back up, we realized demand wasn't quite there. And although people hired someone back, then they went and had to lay them off, right? They might have furloughed them and then brought them on and had to lay them back off because they realized the market's not quite there. The reason why I show this is because we think everything is like flat under COVID. Every time I talk about this, even myself, well, we're still under COVID is the same labor market. It's just changing every single day because different industries are feeling this economy differently today than they were just 4 months ago, 3 months ago, that kind of thing. If I move forward in January, it's going to look different again. So I say that as if you're looking for someone to hire, it's just going to keep changing over into different sectors. All right, I showed you at the national level, this takes that same unemployment insurance claims and looks at it in Kansas, and we have a different story here. Remember, the national was more of an impact on women. Here, it shows that initial unemployment claims are the same. And then today, the labor market's shifting to more men. Why? It's manufacturing. We're laying off that durable manufacturing that we held those people on when I thought maybe we should have let them go. Now we're just keep letting them go. And that's why men are being impacted more. Down here, you look at this, it's not less of a minority issue, it's more of just one race being impacted by black. On this side, this tells a whole lot, actually. If you look at today, it's now people that are further in their career and with more education that is being impacted. Now, this is not volume, this is level of impact, right? This is not total volume of people, this is people per in that sector. So you can see there's a big shift. Now, I haven't been out here before, but I would imagine if I came out here last year, the conversation when we were in a tight labor market is I have a job and it's more on the skilled side. For the last 2 or 3 years is more on the skilled job, even out here. Because every time I went to Hayes and Dodge and Pittsburgh, everyone was saying, I've got jobs, I just can't get them to come out and work. I'm just struggling to get this very tight on the skilled job. Well, guess what? As an employer side, this is the time to say, especially regions like this, to start soaking them up, right? You can now hire them. They might be later in their age, right? But they have more skills, they have more education, they can still be very productive. And this is just a function of our Kansas economy that's switching to this. All right, the census did the surveys for a while, and in here they have depression, anxiety, and finances of households. And if I looked at any one of them, and I have graphs on all of them, if you look at the nation in Kansas, yes, we all came up, we're peaking, and they kind of go up and down a little bit in recent weeks. But out of all of them, well, even all those, we were less than the nation on almost all of them, right? So good news, our households are doing better than the nation in depression, anxiety, and finances. The only thing I did notice, and I thought this is interesting, is those people that were laid off or laid off or were furloughed. We had a lot of furloughs in Kansas, by the way. Those people who were food insecure was higher than the nation. There's actually even more detail about churches and families giving food. We actually had less of that, which was a little surprising to me. But we had more people that had food insecurity issues. Now, this is an issue with re-engaging the labor market, even out here, right? someone gets laid off, maybe there's social problems in our state where we're not seeking those family and friends and churches and things like that, and they're going without food. Their ability to re-enter the labor market is going to be harder, right? Their kids are going to struggle more in school, right? There's a community cost associated with this, and something we should address. All right. One thing I like, other than unemployment, which I don't like looking at unemployment rates because you have missing problems. The only way to be unemployed is you have to be actively looking for a job, and that is not described, particularly in regions like this where someone just says, I already know there's not a job. When there's a job, they're going to call me. So I'm not going to actively look for a job. Not only that, my spouse is working, so I don't really have to work right now, so I can stay unemployed. I mean, I would not be employed, not even in the labor market. So unemployment rate just doesn't really work very well. So I have to look at something else. Yes, Sarah. Mm-hmm.
With that unemployment rate and impact of the schools being online and a parent needing to stay home or for childcare issues and that work from home aspect, or someone needing to stay home because of they've got kids at home doing online learning.
All right, so I'm going to repeat your question for those that are online. The question was from Sarah, right? Sarah wanted to know, of the unemployment, does that capture some of those people that have a spouse that might have to stay home because of school or, right? You're talking about that. You said both, but really those people, a spouse had to stay back because their school is online and they're having to take care of kids. Or maybe the school was still in person, but there's health issues at home and they have to stay home for the kid or themselves to prevent issues of health, right? So right, in that situation, unemployment will not capture that, right? If they gave up looking for a job, they're out of the labor market and labor force would drop, which I'll look at in a second. When I did this last year, it was very clear. I was surprised that I think it was 3 communities like this. In here usually have bankers and people like the business owners, things like that usually come. And I had in 3 communities, there's at least 3, I had someone who was in daycare that came to the event. Like every time, even those communities and other ones, when we were in the tight labor market, the question in Kansas was, the rules for daycare got so restrictive that we ran out of daycare, or there's not a financial market to run a daycare through the state system and do it accurately. You could do it, manage it with family members, fine, but not taking in other kids. There's just too many rules and too costly. And we have spouses that have skills, particularly in regions like this, that could be engaged in the labor market to solve a lot of our labor market needs if there was daycare. They wanted to be. They could have done better. They could have provided more for the family. They wanted to be engaged. They couldn't do it because of daycare. One community it was a church hospital, I can't remember which one, was providing it, and then they gave up. They said it was just too expensive, and they dropped it, and then a whole bunch of people left the workforce in that community. And this other person was like, I want to scale up, but I can't make it financially feasible. I can't do the right price. And the wages they're paying in that community for that manufacturing was actually pretty decent. It still wasn't efficient enough for her to raise her price to take the labor to people engaged. So I know you're talking about the labor, this other side of the equation. Yes, they're going to be not part of the labor market. But the bigger issue is there is labor that's skilled in the state, and there's a issue with daycare in the state, particularly in towns this size. All right, this one I like. If you look at employment population ratio, you cannot hide. I just take everyone that's employed and everyone that's 18 and over. It tells me everything, right? The higher you are, it means we're using more people that are over 18 and they're engaged in the labor market, right? It flattens it. You can't hide from this one. If we go back before 2008, you're in Kansas, we were so much higher than the nation, mostly because we're not going to just sit here and retire in the state. You're going to be engaged, and farmers tend to work till they're 78, 80 years old or whatever, right? They're just going to be engaged in the labor market, right? That's just part of Kansas. We hit the Great Recession. Kansas dropped so much more than the nation. And the nation started growing back. We kept laying people off because we didn't lay them off right away. We had this little flat section in Kansas. And that's why I talk about the labor market in this sense. We finally, in 2017, it was really picking back up in Kansas, where our employment population was moving up all the way in 18 and 2019 and starting to look better. Rest of Kansas would include here because I just take out the big cities. And then you can see COVID hit and they're back up. What do you take on this? First of all, we could have still moved up closer to 52, by the way. That's where Kansas City was a very tight labor market. We could have moved back up to 52 in a very tight sense, so we had room. Last year, there were people unemployed. Even in rest of Kansas, there are people who are not engaged in the labor market that could if there's daycare, right? So how do you read this? One, we could be higher. The whole line should be shifted up, but you can at least get back up to that point. So there are people out there that are unemployed. Why do I show this? Because the next question's here. I go there and businesses, and you can't tell me that. I've got jobs and I keep putting it out there and can't get it filled, right? And then the households, you're talking to some households saying, wait, I put an application out multiple times. I've been actively looking and I can't get a job. There's too much competition. So why is it people are looking for jobs and they can't get a job? Businesses have jobs and they can't fill it. Is it the unemployment benefits? I will tell you back when that $600 first came out, state agency came and asked me to do an analysis, and I found out 78% of all Kansans were better off with unemployment insurance than working. I thought, oh no, I'm so scared that this is bad. But it's since over the summer, people have looked at the majority, most people had too much fear and they stayed engaged in the labor market. Now there's some people on the margin, right, who took advantage and were rent seeking. But for the most part, they were engaged in the labor market. The unemployment benefits dropped in July, so that's not the reason, right? We're still having our problems. And those people who were laid off before, who were on unemployment benefits, they ran out. They didn't have enough cash. They were living paycheck to paycheck. They would have been engaged in the labor market already, right? That's just not the main reason. It's actually a little bit easier. In a labor market, right? We had such a shock to this labor market. It was so massive. It's like when you get ready for Thanksgiving, right? Some of you do puzzles. It's like taking two sets of puzzles and dumping it on the same coffee table. You first got to sort it out, then you got to piece it back together. Well, the labor supply and demand, they just don't equal within one regional market or with one industry. Think about your area here. Someone who got laid off, that job's not going to come back. They got great skills. They just don't have a job here in this town. They could probably go maybe to Goodland or down to Hayes, or I mean, they may fit somewhere else. They just don't fit here anymore, just because there's only so many jobs available, so much to churn to go around. So what we're feeling right now is just this big structural change. We laid off a lot of jobs that won't come back in industries or regions, and it's going to take a long time to heal. The reason why we weren't back to 52 in Kansas is because the nation had a cyclical downturn in 2008. We had structural. We lost jobs that wouldn't come back before. And our labor market was taking a long time to heal. If we move forward, how are we going to get the signal for the labor market to even heal? If you're a business, you still don't know what the labor market is. You don't know what the demand is for your company, so you really haven't even put out that many jobs yet. Once we get past COVID and you're like, I know what the market is, I'm ready to hire 10 new jobs, right? And then you go out there and put the jobs, you can't fill them, so you start raising wages. That's the price signal. Then households start saying, now you finally told me what jobs you need. I need to go get education, which could take 6 months or 4 years, it's 6 years to do, right? It will take a long time for this labor market to adjust. So I say that, just be prepared that it's going to take multiple years before we keep saying this. And businesses are going to say, oh, but I can't fill, I can't fill. Households say, I can't find for a while. All right, here is employment, and I did it by region of the state. There's just two different economies, right? There are the urban economies that lost a lot of jobs and are coming back. And then there are the rest of the state, which lost a whole bunch of jobs, and are either almost back to zero to where they were in January, or even above that. Remember what I talked about earlier? This is the opportunity to hire some of those jobs. Some parts of Kansas, we'll just say Western Kansas is right here, some of you didn't stop at all. I mean, you just kept going because if it was food manufacturing is there or agriculture, you essentially didn't stop at all. You still had the same job you had open before in January that you had open now. And guess what? It wasn't thousands that were matching, but you're slowly filling them up because in those urban areas, they were out of a job, they need a job, and they're starting to match into some of these other parts of the region, right? The labor market solving itself and being beneficial to other parts of the state than the urban areas. All right. Act 3, dichotomy of good and evil. If you think about our industries and our companies, a lot of them we got some great, interesting companies. I mean, animal science or durable manufacturing, non-durable. I mean, there's some great things that we do in the state, all across the state. But just like Macbeth, right, you have character. Macbeth was overly ambitious, and he also had this flaw because of supernatural forces that went from good to evil. We don't want an industry to go bad, right? So let's dig in a little bit more and see what good industries we have that are in danger. Now this breaks all the rules that I should have on a slide. It's just way too much, but I'm kind of nerdy, and this is just so beautiful that I put it on here anyway. So easy things to look. The higher it is, the more of an impact. This on this left side is year over year. So arts, entertainment, recreation. You can see it was growing, and then hit April. By the way, this is Kansas, declined by employment by a whole lot, 51%. And then if you still look year over year, it's still down 12%, right? It's still struggling. But another way to look at this, look at month over month. That same sector had a big decline right then in April, but then it started growing. Remember when I said it's not really the same sectors? COVID keeps shifting. Right, demand, we're finding demand being weaker in other sectors. That's where we're seeing it down here. All these other sectors are now having all these layoffs, where at first it wasn't as much. Now they're still seeing weaknesses over down here. All right, remember when I said I thought the impact, I was still kind of right? That was the employment side. Here's the output side. This is the value of goods and services that we produce. The nation declined by 31%. Kansas declined by 30.3%. So why didn't we lay off the same number of jobs? If you look at output per worker, we should have been much closer to what the nation was. So my 10.2% probably was right. Matter of fact, when I did my impact study, we said manufacturing was going to be hard hit. This was unique to us, and I was exactly right. We thought manufacturing was the hardest hit in Kansas. We thought that other healthcare was going to be hit pretty hard. Remember? It was just essential stuff. All this dentists, things like that shut down. It really slowed it down. We had some of those numbers right. So we're holding on to labor, right? Maybe some labor we could have let go or should have let go. Let me flip the story. The census also did these surveys of businesses. And on an establishment level, not total impact, like manufacturing taking a bigger share, it says that we have less of an impact in Kansas businesses than the nation. That's the good news. One of the reasons why, the biggest reason why, is this financial conditions. We're doing a whole lot better than the nation when you look at financial conditions. So I took that information and the story I keep building about labor and letting them go, did this with the businesses and said, it doesn't make sense. Why don't you just let them go? Let them go, figure out where the new market is, take big bets, start really restructuring your company. And the companies came back and said, no, we really do understand where we're at. We understand the risk. We understand that we don't have a clear direction yet. So we're going to keep it lean until we can move forward. Our fiscally conservative state, right? Our companies are being really fiscally conservative, but holding on to labor first. That's the most important asset. They're making only small bets, and they're going to wait until the end. Good news and bad news, I mean, that's what we did in 2008, and kind of at some point you do need to make some bigger risks, but the companies say they really do have a handle on it. They're not overly ambitious like Macbeth, right? They're very conservative as they move forward. We do the survey, ask them all kinds of questions about profits and volume. They said, yeah, volume dropped, volume of demand. It's going to rebound for some sectors, but not all of them. Input costs, depends on where you're at. Some sectors are going to have big increases in input costs because of that supply chain issue. Remember just in time? You can see that in agriculture. Just in time used to be the best way to reduce your costs. Because we lean down and don't have storage, just in time is the worst thing. It's doing stoppages in production, right? You can't get access to the next thing you need. Even on your ag side, you have a warehouse trying to get those parts. But you're probably less affected there since you're doing here, but just in time on parts can still be a problem if you can't get it somewhere else, and then it stops. So, go back up 30 years ago, you would have had a lot more storage capacity and you could flex it a little bit more. Now, it's just, we're out. There's nothing I can do, not until the next one comes in, right? That's the issue we're having. We asked them the prices that you're going to charge your customers. Almost all of them said, we are not increasing prices. So what's going to happen? The company said, profit margins are going to go down this next year. It's going to be a tough year, right? Businesses are going to take a hit for quite a while to make it through until the markets open up and really start to expand. All right, our forecast. This one doesn't even capture the forecast. This is by industry. So yes, we see some growth across some of the broad sectors, even some of these subsectors that it's going to grow. But this doesn't tell the story. Usually I could say this industry or that industry is going to grow or decline. If you're in a declining sector, the chances of you going bankrupt, there's high risk there. However, there's high risk in someone who's in a growing sector, right? We think the jobs are going to grow, but you make one bad financial choice, just a small little choice, and then all of a sudden you could be going bankrupt. So this comes back to the bankers and economic developers really knowing where those businesses are. And unfortunately, I could put this out. I can't tell you who's going to go bankrupt this next year, right? And that's where you're going to even lose more jobs, is when someone goes bankrupt. They can't sit there and float them, and then you're going to have a job loss. So my problem with this is that I could look at industries, but industries are not going to tell you the full story. All right, Act 4, fate and fortune. Shakespeare likes this idea of predestination, but the hero gets to choose their path. Think about Macbeth, right? He was overly ambitious. Our businesses are not overly ambitious. They're conservative, right? They're not going to do that. When you ask them about wages, I was shocked by this. They said we were going to, for almost 40%, 40% said they're going to increase wages. Now, if you heard me last year and the year before, they're increasing wages because they needed that high-skilled worker. There's just so much competition. This year it shifted. They're increasing wages because it's the middle skill and the lower skill. Remember I said earlier the market has changed and there might be upward mobility? You can see this when we shifted over here. They said, yes, I have to fill that position and I need that middle skilled, and I'm willing to do some training, which they weren't willing to do before. And that lower skilled job, I'm willing to do more training. So if you're looking for that medium skilled and lower skilled, there's going to be wage pressures there, and that's actually could be a healthy thing as we move forward. Our forecast, I showed you unemployment insurance claims. We're losing some higher educated ones, so that's going to bring wages down. We have this upper pressure on middle and lower income coming up, but overall I think wages are going to be flat this next year. It looks like I'm forecasting really strong retail sales growth, but let's be honest with you, if I looked at this at the national level, it was just straight up, those years we declined. We were just not spending much in Kansas. This has been a real problem in Kansas in our budget, is we slowed down spending and didn't keep up with the national economy. So although it's coming up, it's just pent up demand. Once we get past the election, that's when we're going to go and finally go buy some stuff. In January, maybe the second quarter, we'll finally start purchasing those things that we've been putting off. But I don't think that's really going to put us in line. It's going to be pretty hard on the state and local governments. The businesses, there are some industries that said, nope, we're still laying off. Most of them are saying we're going to stay about where we're at. We're going to try to hunker down and just have lost profits. And some are growing because they are in growth sectors, right? Because of a global thing or just positioned in the right one. Out of our forecasts of all the 11 years I've done, this is the widest forecast I've ever given. But I have to tell you the story because you still need to understand. I can't forecast politics. I can't forecast COVID, right? And those are really wide variabilities on industry. So this is the widest ever. I will say in my forecast, both of them, it requires a stimulus to happen. If we don't get a stimulus, it's going to be worse than this. So the bottom level right here in this low forecast, which is actually flat, or we'll say it's decline, slight decline. In this scenario, consumers remain pretty grumpy. They hold and hoard their money, and because they're hoarding their money, they're not spending it, and it's not flowing in those other sectors, and that just continues to wear us out. Schools may shut down across the state. Maybe we shut down parts of the US, and that actually impacts us as well. Right? We don't get a solution in the spring, but maybe late summer and the fall, and that puts us to almost no growth this next year. Keep in mind that we had a recovery already. We hired some people back, but we're not all the way back. Alternatively, you go to the very top, going around 1.1%, we get past this election, consumers are still spending, and that keeps cash flowing. As we put that money back into that leisure and hospitality, they have more money and they spend and they keep the cash. That keeps the flow of money going through the economy. We don't have any shuttering of the governments. We ease up. Maybe COVID, the concerns of some of the COVID also doesn't weigh us down, and we can continue to go out and have other entertainment, open up movies a little bit more than we have. We have a solution maybe in the spring than summer. In that case, we could grow a lot faster, closer to that 1.1%, right? What I'm showing you on the left and right is in the middle is 0.5%. We think the second quarter is where the growth will be in either scenario, and then it kind of levels off. If you do this year over year, we're not going to be back where we were in January. It's going to take quite a few years to get back to that full employment in January. And we shouldn't expect that yet. So we are being optimistic given the circumstances. It's kind of wide because of the things I can't forecast. All right, Act 5, paradox of disappointment. One thing we like Shakespeare is he holds one human nature trait that we just love so much, right? And it's hope. And he holds it out here and just crushes it. And that's our entertainment. That's the paradox, right? So you want me to crush all your hopes? Or I won't crush all your hopes. One thing that people have asked me since this all happened, what recession best looks like today? Is it 9/11? Is it what? And there's just not one. If I was going to come up with one, it's more about the structure of the economy. You go all the way back to the Black Plague. The Black Plague, in some places they lost half of the population, right? It shuttered the economy much more than we did here, right? So we're not near as extreme, but there's some similarities to it. What was going on in the economy in that point in time? They had a feudal system. The kings had power. Those people who were a cobbler, the only way to be a cobbler, you had to be the great grandson of someone else to take over that job. There's no upward mobility at all, right? All of a sudden, when you lost half of the population, they said all the equipment, all the stuff, and someone who was a farmhand could all of a sudden be trained to be a cobbler, right? You had this opportunity for training to fill that position. We have open positions, even especially in Kansas. It's just going to take training to fill them in there, right? Guess what happened to income? Income increased because incomes were increasing at the fastest rate in one of the times of history. We had upward mobility. All of a sudden, we had the lowest income inequality the world's seen for a 100-year period, right? That actually made the economy grow much faster. What's been going on for the last 2 decades? Increased income inequality. The wealthier are getting wealthier, and our economy is kind of slowing down and getting weaker. Large businesses are getting bigger. Small and medium businesses just can't even survive in this. So I'm going to give you a picture where I think small and medium businesses could actually pivot all of a sudden. They have a unique position. People that can see more of that upward social mobility than we've seen in the past. I've talked about entrepreneurism. In Kansas, we've been dying. We have less entrepreneurs out there. It's a nation too. But look at this. This is this year, business applications. Business applications with planned employees are growing by leaps and bounds right now, right? Imagine all those other ones who are not even ready to put a business application, who said, I was employed before, I now have no job, I'm living out here in Colby, I could do it better than my previous employer. The value of my house, as your value of houses are increasing here too, right? Value of houses wealth went up. Plus you had all this other federal stimulus. Federal stimulus itself you've been unemployed, you could have used that cash to help float your new idea, right? Spend that time creating a new business, right? That will take time to actually come to market, but that could be changing the direction. All right. One thing, I don't know how much teleworking has been going on here, but I talked to businesses all across the state and they're saying, okay, not sure I really like teleworking, but you should look at it differently. Teleworking, especially in a state like ours, which we have small economies everywhere. Even Topeka is a small economy. Wichita is a small economy. We don't have enough labor in all of them. It's a struggle, right? You just increased your labor pool for those people with disabilities or transportation of vehicle issues. Or guess what? You can now, if you use teleworking, you really embrace it, you can now use someone that was over in Hayes. They can still live there, but they can solve your problems and work for you now, right? You just increased that labor pool. Removal of rules and laws. The best example is telehealth. You couldn't talk to your doctor from home because they couldn't get paid by Medicaid. Now you can. Think about all the rules within businesses across the state. Once COVID hit, they said, we don't need all these rules are ridiculous. We just have to move forward and get stuff done. That's where these smaller and medium businesses that are more nimble, keep cutting costs, could actually find the new markets, right? New markets are changing. Access to the new markets are changing, right? They can have the labor, reduce costs to be more nimble, find those new markets. Larger businesses are struggling. They're controlling markets, but smaller businesses can make a new market, right? And then over here, we had all this software before. We just weren't using it, right, for that productivity. This last decade, people kept saying productivity, the value per person, was flat. It just wasn't doing anything. We're mysterious. We had all this technology and nothing was happening with productivity. Well, we finally said, okay, we could use the data. We could use all the software. If we do, those companies that really embrace that, productivity can go up. Guess what happens with productivity? If productivity goes up, particularly that middle income and that low income, the value's there to pay them more, right? And you all of a sudden have growth in that upward social mobility, right? I see that as an opportunity of really shifting this labor market. It actually shifts the dynamics of this market too, of how you use that labor in a different way. All right, if I was to say anything, I think there's a lot of creative destruction. We're going to lose a lot of industries that will go away. Processes will go away. We're not done with the destruction part. Bankruptcies will happen. I mean, that is going to still happen. We're going to get worn out. Some companies are just going to get worn out because they just can't keep going, right? Kansas in particular. US is already starting to improve, right? So that's taking, general growth is taking pressure off of some other companies in the nation. In Kansas, manufacturing is being worn out right now, the durable side, not the non-durables, right? Non-durables, they're running out of cost issues, but they're running full capacity, right? I say non-durables foods, I should say that. The food side, they're running. The durable side, the machinery side, where you're having just-in-time issues, demand's not quite there, trade issues, it's being weak, that's where we're running into problems. And that makes the general economy kind of weak here versus the nation. The best thing I could say is ad astra per aspera, right? Through the difficulty. I mean, it's going to be difficult this next year. What questions do you have? Any questions? Andrew, you can, I've got my phone if you want to relay a question from those that are online. I have my phone, you can send me a text. No questions? All right. I'll wait a second to see if Andrea's got one.
So, okay, at first, the highest disruption was among low skill, but is that shifting to?
Yeah, in Kansas, we're losing those jobs in manufacturing, and it's shifting over to more men and more skills, more education is what's shifting over to. And I think that's going to continue.
I think part of our concerns out here is our unemployment is already 3% or less. So we need more employees, and we're probably heavier in the non-skilled labor with our businesses. But concern, we had to furlough some with the COVID, but we tried to maintain, we did the PPP, did all that. But the outlook, is the concern of what does that look like in the next 6 months to a year, where we're struggling to find the employees now, but we're also apprehensive because we don't know if there's going to be a business. So yeah, definitely uncertainty.
So for those online, Jason was talking about unemployment is already really low, it's been low, and his demand is really that lower skilled, but still not sure if you can find or fill that position. I don't know what the employment population ratio is specifically for here. I actually did it by region before, so and you could do it more here as well, saying here, everyone employed by divide everyone by a certain age. You should do more than a county because your labor market is a lot more than a county. But you can sit there and say, okay, how many people are out here? It tends to be already higher, right? I mean, you're already getting closer to that 52 just because you're already going to work. Particularly here is nothing new. You have not had a big structural shift in this region versus southwest was a little bit more different, right? The labor just changed. Yours hasn't. That shift in automation forcing for farming went a long time ago, right? So that's not as an issue. But your ability to track them, right? There are people unemployed even in that low skilled. What's their willingness to move, particularly the cost structure here? I mean, your housing, and I don't know what your housing quality is. That's usually the question that most people want to talk about in these places. But do you have housing? Can you get them engaged in your schools quickly? You might be able to. Normally, that doesn't move. That segment doesn't move, but they might move if they are still needing a job, no unemployment benefits.
Even with willingness to train and support and a competitive wage and benefit package, we just aren't getting the quality from it.
And that's where the world's lowest water. People know that tech raise is not it's not there, and it's the skill or the ability to perform with what we need to do, but it is a big concern out here, but we've looked at housing and daycare, but touched on that earlier. That's a concern as well. It's hard for us to have that selling point for somebody to relocate. When we are probably about as full as we can be on housing, and there's no daycares that when COVID's impacted that more because of the daycares.
So,
That's about right now.
so for those online, Sarah was talking about, hey, they're already competitive with insurance and benefits, and they're also struggling. And then there was a conversation coming back to there's not enough housing, and then even if they did come, then how are they going to have daycare? Is the statements that were made. I will say, 2 years ago and 3 years when we kept saying, oh, it's tight, it's getting tighter, it's tighter labor market, we're struggling to go here. And one thing that there's not a single employer in the state liked that I had said, but are we really tight? And then they say, oh, but yeah, we are. I can't hire anyone. Then my response back is, why is at the nation, why is income rising faster than Kansas? And there for a while, Kansas, when you took into inflation coming into account, we were declining after we took that into account. So my only pushback there for quite a while in Kansas is that we look around in our neighbors and say, okay, I'm paying competitively compared to my neighbors, but maybe everyone in Kansas, all your neighbors, are also not increasing wages fast enough. And the real answer was the wage should have been the price signal for someone to move over or to solve their own housing problem or their own daycare problem to do that. Now, I only say that just because I can see you smiling and wanting to. I want you to say a counter argument to it, but that's my counter argument every time someone says that isn't. And my proof is that wages didn't go up for quite a while there until just recently. The last couple of years, it finally did. We finally got competitive. And I'll give you one more proof. When you look at corporate profits were going up. So we had money. We could have moved over it. But when a business says, okay, I'm looking at the market, well, I'm being competitive, when no one else is doing it, I don't need to really increase. So anyway, you go ahead, give the counter argument. Yeah. Right. So for those people online, the comment was wages in public schools, and that is definitely an issue. We've been losing there's already been stories the last several years of us losing teachers to other states. And well, not only that, then some places now lowering the bar of what a teacher can be to be credentialed to be in front of your kids, which is really messing up the whole education system. But that's another story on there. There's not another question, and I haven't seen. Oh wait, someone has a question here. Jenny has some comments about what you're talking about. Yes, you could try to unmute Jenny. I'm not sure if the sound will work. So go ahead, Andrew, you can unmute and see if she can say something. I will
This is
tell you.
Jenny. Can you hear me?
We can hear you. Great.
Okay. Yeah. So, as a healthcare employer, so we have both sides. You know, we have a very professional staff, and then we have the worker, like Jason has talked about. And you know, we've done significant wage increases and are very, very competitive, almost to the point of insanity. You know, especially like in our CNA population, and we're no better than we were. And it goes back to there is nothing we can do to offset the housing and the daycare issue.
So there are solutions to housing and daycare, but then that gets to community development. I don't even know all your role on community development. I will pause and maybe, do you have a thought on that or not? Okay. Okay. I didn't even see your slide, so I didn't know you were going to talk about it. So that discussion, we'll come back to the discussion on that. But there are solutions to it. There are
Very good.
communities that have come together and solved it. There are businesses that have solved it as well, even hospitals in the past that have, or a big private school that just takes it on for the whole community as a solution. So I've seen that across the state in towns smaller than this and bigger than this, you know, trying to solve those issues. And housing we can talk about as well, but that's an issue.
Find somebody that is willing to take on what the state, you know, requirements are to be able to be a daycare provider. We have enough liabilities the way it is, let alone a daycare. So yeah, there's several reasons why we haven't chose that path yet, but would be interested in a community type deal for sure. So.
All right, with that, I think it's a good transition over to you. By the way, you can go onto our website to download slides if you really wanted to look more detail. And I'll hand this off to you.
All right. I think everybody in the room, based on who registered, everyone online knows who I am. I'm Vernon Hurd. I'm the Executive Director at the Thomas County Economic Development Alliance. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about our local economy, and we will talk a little bit about housing and daycare. First thing we're going to look at is one of the biggest things that people always talk about when we talk about our local economy is we talk about population. Obviously, if we don't have people, we don't have workers. Thomas County, in comparison to our neighbors, is doing fair. Our population year over year for 2019 dropped 1.9%, according to the census. If you look at our civilian labor force, that's where, you know, Jeremy already talked a little bit about labor force. One of the things in economic development we look at is the labor participation rate, which is number of people in the population that are actually participating in our labor force. We've been doing really, really well. Interestingly enough, you know, if you look at the graph, you can see this would have been probably April was that data set. We had that sharp. The nice thing is we have this really sharp V as well, though, because that, you know, we did a good job of the people that did leave the labor force are now back employed. To the credit of a lot of our employers, they were wise. We did a lot of, when everything first got started in March, I fielded a lot of phone calls from businesses saying, what do we do? And my number one piece of advice was, do not lay off your employees. If you need to shrink your labor force, you furlough them. So that, because at the time, and we still don't know yet what the impact of these unemployment insurance rates are going to be. There is still a great big cloud of, are all these additional unemployment claims going to affect our unemployment insurance rates down the road like a normal unemployment insurance claim would? Typically, as you guys know, as business owners, if you have people that go on unemployment, your unemployment insurance rate at the state then goes up as a result. There have been a lot of talk at the State House about basically giving everyone a pass for 2020 because of COVID. I guess we really aren't going to know what the effect is going to be until the legislature gets back in session in January and starts actually doing some work on that issue. Everybody, all of my colleagues, we are all strongly urging our legislators, and as business owners, I would encourage you to do the same. If there was ever a year to say it wasn't the employer's fault that these people left their jobs, this is it. So I really hope we don't penalize our businesses in Kansas as a result of that. And then if you look at, so going back to my point though, they furloughed. And the advantage of a furlough, and this is going forward especially because we don't know what's coming this fall. Some of my colleagues at a conference last week were saying, they're already trying to counsel businesses to be prepared for closures. I really hope we don't see that, but we just don't know. And so again, I'm counseling businesses, if you have to shrink your labor force, furlough them, simply because then if you go back to them and say you can come back now, and they choose not to, they leave the unemployment benefit. Which again, if we don't get a pass, might help your unemployment insurance rate for next year. When we look at year-over-year employment for 2019, Thomas County had 4,119 people employed. That was an increase of 1.9%, which is phenomenal. The only county that beat us on increase was Gove at 6.3%. Gove County has, in the last 2 years, been this big asterisk on all the data points, and I have yet to find anybody that can explain to me why they're having such an increase in employment year over year. They've also had dramatic capital expenditure numbers, and there haven't been there hasn't been a huge big factory built or anything like that. So no one yet has been able to answer that question for us, but they are still an asterisk. When we look at area employment concentration, local government sits at 28.62%. Keep in mind, and because I asked Jeremy this very question, I'm like, Jeremy, how is it that local government has the largest concentration? Because when I survey folks, I always know that our number one employers typically are public schools and then healthcare. Well, that's how I found out local government for this stat includes public education. So that includes all three of our public school districts as well as our community college. And then if you look at trade, transportation, utilities, that's so that's retail, that's all of that other stuff that goes into it. Because if we separate, like if I look at top 10 employers, our healthcare would have been number 2 at the hospital. That education under health at 10.06%, that also includes private schools. So we have, as you know, we have two well-established private schools that most people are aware of, but we actually do have a third in Thomas County that most people aren't aware of. And then leisure and hospitality, natural resources and mining. If you look at employment growth, we've done pretty good. Everybody's pretty much holding their own from 18 to 19. There have been a few areas that had minor declines. Professional and business services are the ones that had the largest increase. Not really sure what accounted for that, but that's, they had that, I mean, that's a pretty big jump. One of the things I did keep in here was we talked about when there were industries identified that we could look at. I only wanted to point out retail trade only because in Thomas County, our economy is so dependent on I-70 and the trade that we have with all of our neighbors, and not just those immediately that border us, but some even further. As you look at this, at the data point on dollars in millions, you see this huge spike in 19. That was obviously due to the wind turbine project that we had. We also had a pipeline project that some people weren't aware of that was going on in Thomas County at the time. So we had two major construction projects that were here for many months that had a huge increase. And then we started to, once that all started to go away, we were doing pretty good and still holding pretty strong. And then COVID came. Yep.
This employment being level, by the way, across the state, this is great. Most of the rest of the state was just declining. Retail. And retail sales were dropping. Usually when you go to 2008, that was the peak, right before 2008, that was the peak by a long shot, and everything was going this downward arrow. You actually went up from 2008 and went much higher than that. I mean, that was,
yeah.
I can only think of maybe a few other places we can come close to what that looks like. So it definitely is fueling your economy by on the job side and the retail sales through taxes and things like that. Impacting your economy. Significantly different from everything.
For those of you online, Jeremy was commenting about how our employment in the retail trade in most areas of Kansas dropped in 2008 and stayed there, where we spiked and then have stayed level with some additional growth. And he made the point that's a huge benefit for us. And again, it goes back to that retail trade would include all of that Interstate 70 traffic and stuff like that. So when did the Oasis open? 2003. Okay. If we look at annual wages year over year, not huge growth as a total. Only average wage went up about $1,000. But we had some sectors that had significant increases, and then a few that had some drops. One of the things that Wichita State, I learned, does is they have their own metrics that they measure healthy, wealthy, and wise as an index. And on this slide, you can see how that is scored, the different things that go into health, wealth, and wise. Thomas County rated 19 for 2020, which is really, really well when you consider that's out of all 105 counties. Significantly, there's only one neighbor that beat us, and that was Greeley County at 13. Population helps them out in that regard. When you look at business dynamism, this is all about diversity in our economy. And if there's one thing that I'm always driven by, not just personally, but by my board, is how can we do even more to make a more diverse and dynamic economy in Thomas County? We're very beneficial. We scored 25 out of 105. And that's really important. And that's probably the number one thing that has kept us so strong and so well employed through all of the things that we're seeing this year. If we didn't have that diverse economy, we would probably have just as much difficulty as they're having in some of the other micropolitan areas, especially on the east side of the state. When we talk about areas that are generating interest and growth in Thomas County, especially in the last year, manufacturing has been the number one driver for interest as far as people reaching out and looking at what could possibly come next for Thomas County. We've had several a lot of interest in manufacturing, especially on the value-added ag side. Retail has been a high interest area, and it's now come to fruition. We have 2 new retail locations on South Range that everybody's aware of, and we've had additional inquiries there. Wholesale distribution has also generated a lot of interest in the last 6 months. We've had a lot of interest in companies that were looking at Thomas County as a place for wholesale distribution. There's one large international company that I'm sure you've all shopped with, especially through COVID, that is currently making massive expansions all across the country to even further decentralize their distribution network. So fingers crossed, Colby becomes that hub in the Northwest Kansas region. Fingers crossed. Areas of concern for our economy, Jason and others have already commented, housing and childcare are two of the #1 things that affect our economy. In the city of Colby, we don't have a lot of places that are currently platted for additional residential development. There are two places that are platted for residential development that currently don't have the infrastructure for it. But aside from that, it's a big question as to where housing goes next. We have already had conversations at the local level about doing a housing study so that we can determine what kind of incentives we can bring in from the state, whether that might be moderate income housing incentives, a rural housing incentive district, but we are looking at those things actively. Childcare is a concern, not just here in Northwest Kansas and Thomas County. This is a statewide thing. To Jeremy's point earlier, this is another thing that I tell every parent, I tell every employer, if you haven't, every time you talk to your local state legislators, you need to be talking to them about childcare and how different the rules and regulations are for childcare here in Kansas versus all of our neighbors. If we were to relax some of those rules and bring them more in line with some of our neighbors, we might not have the same problem that we do. We might have more people interested in actually getting back into childcare as a business. Childcare cost is always going to be a concern. I would certainly give high accolades to the hospital for taking the step and opening up a facility for their own employees. More and more businesses, and we're seeing this not just here in Kansas, but this is nationally, more and more businesses are taking on childcare as a cost center and recognizing it that it's the key to not only maintaining their workforce that they have, but also attracting the best talent and just taking it on as an expense. Planning and development is another area of concern. We talked about the fact that we don't really know where the next housing developments are going to go in Colby. And that's not just a Colby problem. Really, we need to start looking at that from a Thomas County holistic problem. Thomas County as a whole desperately needs a comprehensive plan. If you look at the zoning, so there was a project being discussed in Western Thomas County, not so far in the recent past, that generated a lot of concern from a lot of people saying, how do we stop this? And the reality is a project like that can't be stopped in Thomas County because we don't have zoning regulations. Basically, once you pass the 3-mile mark from Colby, it's the Wild West. And to a landowner, I would say that's great because then you have control and you can do whatever you want. But when we start looking at what this region can look like in the future, we really need to do some planning and have a comprehensive plan so that we know not just as Colby grows, but how does this affect Brewster? How does it affect communities like Rexford? Because if some of the manufacturing projects that are looking at Thomas County actually come to fruition, those small towns are going to see just as much growth as Colby, because not everyone's going to want to live in Colby. Some people are going to want to live in a small community like Brewster and have their kids in that much smaller school. Same goes for Rexford. And so that planning and development is something that we're going to have to take on. Unfortunately, those kinds of plans don't just happen for free. They'll take investment. And my hope is that both the city and the county will work together and share those costs. So that's where I would ask, if you have the opportunity and you speak to your city councilman, or if you talk to your county commissioners, it's a great opportunity to ask if they're ready to start building that partnership and making that happen. Short and sweet, are there any questions? Wow.
What would be the forecast for housing? You talked about housing being an issue in there. And I know that was an issue when I moved to the area 5 years ago. If I wouldn't have had the connections I had, I don't know where I would be.
Mhm.
The person they wanted to hire for my position in education that I left vacant, one of the reasons they didn't take the job was lack of housing in the area, affordable housing compared to the wage they were getting. So that was part of it. What is the timeline for, new apartment complex or new housing development as far as the county goes?
So Sarah's question was, what's the timeline for new housing development, basically? If someone wanted to build a new housing development, the first thing they're going to have to do is find the available land. As far as building a new apartment complex, that would require commercial property, certain commercial zone. We don't have any of those available right now. So that would, again, go back to the planning, where we need to have that kind of planning take place. It's not that there aren't places in town that could really quickly become zoned for that kind of a development. And the zoning piece could theoretically take place in a matter of months. It's not a long, drawn out process, as long as you're not trying to put it in an area where it just doesn't make sense. And there again, it goes back to that plan, creating that comprehensive plan for what do we want Thomas County to look like. For example, when you look at housing, we have industrial now on the southeast side of the city of Colby. We have industrial on the southwest part of Colby. So I mean, from a personal standpoint, like if I wanted to build a house, chances are I'm going to want to build it someplace which is dominated more like by residential rather than being close to industrial. And so that really, I mean, we're limiting our factors. So there again, it goes back to creating the right plan so that that's available. As far as actually building it, that's probably the number one problem you have, not just in Thomas County, but again, I would go back, especially regionally. Building a quality home at an affordable price is extremely difficult. If it hadn't been for the Rural Housing Incentive District that was established near Dillon's, I doubt that those homes could have been built as affordably as they were. And that's one of the things that in the housing plan we hope to identify is in a housing study, we'll be able to identify whether or not we could even create another Rural Housing Incentive District. The new census data will also help establish what that looks like as well. But yeah, I mean, a new apartment complex, there again, it takes the developer that wants to have that expense to make that happen. And that we don't have any, I'm not aware of anyone in town, any of our current contractors and builders that would say, yeah, I'm ready to build an apartment complex. Not to say that if we didn't have one built, that it probably wouldn't fill up pretty quickly. But I think when you look at the timeline to make a project like that cash flow, it's a significant investment that someone has to be willing to realize that they don't hit a break-even point for probably 10, 15 years.
Can I add to that?
Mm-hmm.
So, the housing problem, there's the last couple of weeks has been an issue. So it's all on the cost side. Oh wait, I don't want to sit down and lean forward. The the cost side has been a problem all across the state. Even in urban areas, you cannot do affordable housing anywhere in the state just because the cost of materials prevented it. And we've been engaged by across the state, and we did it for the state for affordable housing, looked at housing across the state and said there's still empty housing stock as well. So not only that doing new is going to be hard because just the cost, particularly the further you get away from an urban area, the cost to ship it here is just gets way up. It makes it just unaffordable. The other issue is the mix, the preferences, the expectations. Millennials are coming out thinking they should have a house like their parents. And let's be honest with you, they need to take a house that was actually built in 1930 and renovate it up. And they had unrealistic expectations of having this magnificent new home with a big kitchen that could be walked through. And you didn't have a house anywhere in this entire, I'm sure anywhere in this, that you had an open floor plan anywhere. So their expectations were unrealistic for what the market could even produce in any short time in any part of this entire state, urban or rural. And so now we just see with, because of how the interest rates are so low, this actually is opening up a little bit more, is pushing it down where we can get a little bit more to the affordable side. So over the last 5 years, it's just been the high income, those people who had wealth, they created the new housing stock, and then it had to shift downwards. So they abandoned a house and someone moved in it and abandoned a house, and then that created your affordable housing, which still people didn't want because then it had too much elbow grease. So there's part of a preference and social problem. Let's be honest with you, because they just had unrealistic expectations what the housing could do. But it's opening up now where we can now build a little bit more. But to build an entire affordable housing development, it's hard to do it in an urban area. It's even harder to do it out here. You have to have, and I've seen communities that have done it. Those communities that the city really say, okay, we're going to do it, and here, this is where it's going to do, and they get all the land and all the water and sewer done, and they plan it out, and then they're ready for the developer to come in. It usually takes to someone who is a farmer who just believes in the community to actually start doing the development on there. That's the ones I've seen that are actually successful in the size community, where it's someone who really said, okay, I could make money, I just need to put it over here after the city has set it up. Because other than that, it's just to get a big developer who would do even 20 homes here. Why would they do it here when they are struggling financially to do it in Kansas, right out of Kansas City or Topeka? They just can't do it. So it's going to take someone local to say, we're ready to take that risk. And you should ask those surrounding areas, because there's some communities, down in, I don't know all the ones in Garden, but I mean, there's some out here that have had some successes. You should go ask them how they did it. That's really more of than a housing plan. How do you actually do it? I think I told you the secret sauce. It was really the city took all the brunt, and then a local farmer is really the one who had the money, who was ready to make that investment, particularly their own land. They kind of tied together and did it.
Can you check and see if there's any questions from online? Right. If there's questions online, go ahead and let Jeremy know. Or you can unmute them. One point I would also make towards the housing issue is, especially when we talk about younger people, they're coming out of college with so much more debt that it makes it even harder for them to even afford purchasing a home. I read a story, this was actually pre-COVID in February. I remember reading the story talking about how people coming out of college, and even in their late 20s, early 30s, more and more are deciding against home ownership. We're not seeing that. And this is where there's a disconnect. I'm not seeing that out here where people are saying, no, I don't want to rent a home, or I don't want to have all the expenses that go with owning a home. But especially in urban areas, people are just deciding that I like the fact that if something breaks, I just call my landlord and they take care of it. Condo ownership, especially in urban areas, has become more popular than having a standalone house. And I could be completely wrong on this, but this is just one of my thoughts. I've always thought maybe what we need to again create some more of those starter homes is, what if we had some condos built that were maybe more even, and we have something like this, but not like this. Not so much the apartment style, but a true like condo style community for seniors so that they could say, you know what, I'm tired of having to mow my lawn or, deal with some of the exterior kinds of things and just have a place to live. And then, I don't need all 4 bedrooms that I had when my kids were home because they're not home all the time anymore, but maybe I just need 1 spare room. And so, but there again, even when you look at senior developments, it takes someone that's willing to invest their own money into making that happen. No questions online. All right. I guess with that, I'm going to hand it back to Jeremy.
Do you guys consider Hill City part of these parts? Yes, no,
They're not far away.
not far away. I was gonna say my. Well, I was just going to make a connection. My family homesteaded, by the way, this is not close, down in Plains, Kansas. So we had the original family land there. And we don't know the whole history on the other side, but I know my great grandmother and my grandmother grew up in Hill City, and we saw the farm. Actually, no one in my family's ever even seen the farm except for me today. On the way out here, I went over to Hill City, took some pictures of our family farm that my mother has had since they were a girl. They just never even lived on it and has never even seen the thing. So I went out there, two pieces of property, already sold a third one out there. So Hill City, that's not far. I'm from families from these parts, sort of. All right. So thank you very much for coming. I will say that we have these forecast booklets. You can take one. In February, we're going to send the other one, which actually has the healthy, wealthy, and wise, and business dynamism and other stuff. We'll send that out automatically too for registering. If you thought this was useful, let me know. We'll send out a survey. If you don't think it's useful and you get all this information, that's great. Just tell me that as well. I really won't hurt my feelings. But I like to have a discussion. So yes. So they can ask, or actually, I will probably just leave a couple for you if they want to come by your office. So if you're online, just come by Vernon's office and we'll leave 3 of them with them, and so that you guys can come pick one up that way. With that, I will hang around for a few minutes and answer any other questions you might have. Thanks. Have a good day.
If you guys don't need another name tag, go ahead and leave those on the table. I'm sure they can recycle those and put them to good use.
Yes. Surprisingly expensive little boogers.
Thank you, guys.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Don't need all this. Our insurance guy gives us this every year for Christmas.
You have no worries when it comes to nuts. They're not going to go to waste.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you, Jason. Nice to meet you.
Thanks for coming out.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome. Tell me,